Who certainly knows the summit circuit well, indeed has been campaigning for 20 years or more. Originally the founder of Live Aid is here pacing the boards, looking slightly world weary with what he's been seeing and hearing. But he did say that any failure here would be beyond catastrophic. I'm talking about Bob Geldof, of course, and he joined me a little earlier. This is what he had to say.
I haven't a clue what's going on. I've been just in this place all day. I don't think they'll contemplate that. I think there is a grave understanding that this is fundamental and possibly existential for a lot of people on the planet, this crisis. They must find a way through it. And the essence of globalization, which they've just discovered, is enforced cooperation.
There is a world weariness to what you're saying, understandably perhaps. Do you think that G20 summits are not the place to work these things out? I
think they're the only place. I think it's made the G8 redundant. Who cares what we think anymore? I mean, what's interesting is the media is focusing on Sarkozy or Obama or something. It's academic if Sarkozy walks out. Dude, if you've got a problem, walk out. Who cares? The French national economy in the face of the global one is nothing. And I think we've begun to understand that. So national grandstanding is over, or at least it should be. And the problem has been that while we imagined we'd built a global financial architecture which was benefiting us, we hadn't, because we'd excluded 50% of the globe, the half the world that lives on less than $2 a day. If you exclude the productive and intellectual capacity of 50% of the world, you have an unstable system. It's top heavy, it'll fall over.
Well, if what we're hearing today is right, the headlines that we will come out of this summit with are not about France, are not about Germany, they're not even about financial regulation as things stand. No. They're about a global idea of a cheap overdraft, drawing rights for the IMF, which would make it a lot easier for those countries you're talking about to survive. Is that a good thing?
Special drawing rights are a sort of arcane economic device, and they've been around for ages, and many of us have been saying, why don't you utilise things that are there to be used? And I'm not sure exactly how this is going to work out. There's loads of mechanisms that you can use to fund this thing. We've already seen, these completely innovative mechanisms like quantitative easing. Old words like aid are now called fiscal stimulus. We've just given ourselves massive amounts of aid. When people say, Bob, does aid work? Yeah, we've just given ourselves trillions of aid. What was called debt is now called toxic assets. So SDRs, special drawing rights, are a sort of very esoteric a currency, and we can use that to bail out people very easily. I just don't know what the mechanism they're going to employ. Maybe that hasn't been discussed yet.
Okay, but language aside, the focus appears to be on the developing world now.
It has to be. I mean, my point is that and I think this is the beginning of trying to work out some new global architecture, but without bringing in the peripheral economies and the marginalised people that live in them, we're not going to do it. Look, probably the great unsung triumph so far of the 21st century was the lifting of 400 million Chinese people out of extreme poverty through trade. A retreat to protectionism is a retreat to militarism, national bankruptcy and ruin. And ruined countries strike out. We must avoid that. So we must expand. If Africa, for example, I'm sorry to bore people, if Africa got an injection now, which the World Bank is calling for amongst others, of $50 billion. Now, don't forget that Britain gave one company 75 billion quid a couple of weeks ago, Lloyd's. We're talking about 50 billion from the world to one continent. It's available through already committed, aid flows, SDRs, or through IMF gold. It's available. If we injected 50 billion through the African Development Bank into Africa, the return immediately to Britain is 750 million quid in jobs and export, 2 billion to Germany, 1.8 to China and the US.
I'm going to take you back a decade. You probably remember Genoa, Seattle. A lot of the protests then were anti-globalization.
Yes.
Now there's a very different feeling to the protests, much more specifically against those in the financial sector. Is it still the same message coming through when you look at the protests today?
Look, globalization is no longer some abstract. It is an empirical reality. Planetary interconnectedness is never going away again.
That's what you would say to protesters now?
But I would also say you have absolutely justifiable reason to protest against the bankers who put their noses in the trough, the regulators who turned away, and the governments who smiled broadly as the tax take grew. But I would also say protest against yourself, because we sucked on the tit of free money, and the bloated asset that burst was ourselves, and we have to clear up that mess.
20 years ago, when you founded Live Aid, did you ever think you'd still be standing here talking to people like me about the same thing? That what was in there, no wonder it's empty.
It's the most boring thing. Look, how boring is this? You've got to stay in one position all day. I essentially do your job and just walk up and down begging to be in. Please interview me. I do have a point of view. That sort of thing. Oh.
Well, you can see the frustration there on the face of an age-old activist and campaigner, Bob Geldof. Imagine the frustration, though, if you were the cameraman at this event. All he was asked to do was take a picture, a family photo, if you like, of all the leaders together. G20, it's a big number. It shouldn't have been an impossible task, but this is what happened. Look at the first picture. We're going to bring you that right now. The first picture of this family photo, all the world leaders collected together, looks perfect.